again, and welcome to the second conference this morning. So we're going to dive into supernatural devilry with the exhibition that is being presented at the Hôtel de Ville during all the festival. And to introduce Denis Pellerin, I will welcome Philippe Dallet, who's an anthropologist and who's conceived the exhibition with Denis Pellerin. Philippe Dallet.
So good morning, everybody. Thank you, Denis, for inviting us. And so I would like to introduce Denis Pellerin, who is somehow my master in many fields. He's one of the greatest historians in photography and in photography in relief, in stereoscopy. And I feel it's necessary to say a few words because he has now the function of he's curating the very huge collection, one of the largest in the world, of stereoscopies. These wonderful pictures he will explain you all about in a few minutes, in 1 second. And he's dealing with and enlarging, researching, and publishing and the collection of Dr. Brian May, who is the founder and of the legendary group Queen. And he's also astrophysician and somebody involved in many, many projects, but his passion is stereoscopy. And the best person to deal with his collection was Denis, who always, in the last years, publishes many, many books. And unfortunately, the stereoscopy is not understood very well by many people, especially people who work in VR, in new media. Me, as an anthropologist, I realized I had to work a lot on these ancient materials to understand the new media, really. And what happened is that we don't realize that, as we talk a lot about immersion just before, it was wonderful, but that stereoscopy is the most developed moment in history and in history of technology to I would say, augment the reality, change the perception, and it's connected, of course, a lot with the problem of vision. And it's something that we should recall, and we try to show in this exhibition through the example of the Diableries, which was researched by Denis, that stereoscopy is very important to understand the future of perception of immersion process and augmentation of reality. So you will, I think, understand why I say that. Thank you, and you have the floor.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Philippe, and thank you, Audrey, and thanks to the NIFFF for inviting us to give this talk here. So we've just been listening to a talk about the immersive lab. Well, for stereoscopy, you don't need as much equipment. All you need is this, or actually your 2 eyes, and you can get some immersion as well. But I'll explain that. Well, for a lot of people, 3D starts with Avatar, which is not really true. 3D started a long time ago. Actually, it started in 1832 with this man, Charles Wheatstone. He invented stereoscopy and the word as well in 1832. People knew about binocular vision before him, and Leonardo da Vinci tried to explain that. But Leonardo worked with a sphere and a pillar to demonstrate stereoscopy, and he missed the thing, actually. He missed it, and only Wheatstone in 1832 managed to prove that if you drew a figure as seen by the left eye and then another figure as seen by the right eye, and if you found a way to fuse these two images, each eye could only see one image, and then the brain would fuse the images into one 3-dimensional image. So that's what he managed to prove with drawings That was 1832, 7 years before photography was introduced to the world. Wheatstone waited for 6 years before he actually presented his invention, the stereoscope. So this is his original stereoscope, the one he presented to the Royal Society on the 21st of June 1838, sorry, I'm forgetting my English. And it's a very crude instrument, and it uses mirrors. So you've got two mirrors at an angle of 90 degrees, and on either side of the easels here, you've got, you had the pictures, and you put your nose there, and you would see. So you could, there was no way you could see the two pictures at the same time. You had to look through the mirrors, and when you look through the mirrors, you saw something in 3D. Wheatstone presented 20 drawings when he, with his instrument, but unfortunately, most of them have disappeared. I was lucky enough to find 2 surviving drawings in the collections of the Science Museum, and nobody knew what they were, but I recognized them as original drawings from Wheatstone. So here is one of them. It's quite crude, but as you can see faintly, the pencil mark here and the prick of the pair of compasses, which he used to draw these 2 images. So that's one of his first drawing. It's not much, but it's very first stereo, one of the very first stereos ever. Here is another one, which is a bit more elaborate. This one he didn't publish, so I was very pleased to find this glass, drawing of a glass. Again, he had to close one eye, draw the glass, take another piece of paper, close the left eye, and with the right eye draw what he saw. And this is what he got, a sort of 3D drawing of a glass. The Wheatstone stereoscope was never very popular because it was cumbersome. It was used mostly in laboratories to experiment on binocular vision. And so in 1849, David Brewster came up with a more compact and transportable form of a stereoscope, which is this one. It's hardly bigger than a pair of binoculars. Everything is in a box, and instead of mirrors, he used lenses. The advantage was that the 2 pictures could be put side by side on the same mount, and that was easier to use, cheaper to produce, and of course cheaper to buy for people. The stereoscope was first introduced to the world during the Great Exhibition in 1851. So 1849, Brewster develops his stereoscope, but he was a very grumpy old man, and he fell out with everybody he worked with. So nobody in England wanted to actually make his stereoscope. So he had to go to France. He found a French optician, Jules Dubosc, who made the stereoscope and brought it to the exhibition in 1851. So that's when stereo actually arrived for real in the world with photographs. So this is an actual view of the Crystal Palace in 1851. They had to build the palace over the trees of the park, Hyde Park. And in the foreground, you can see one of Dubosc's original stereoscope. And it has hardbacks. It means that it was only used for daguerreotypes and paper photographs. You couldn't use it for transparencies. So the first stereos we have, the oldest we have in the collections, are views from the exhibition. So here is one from the exhibition. If you close one eye and then the other, you will realize that between the 2 exposures, a considerable time took place because somebody had time to actually water the aisle, the whole aisle, because of the dust. They had to water the aisle quite often. And between the 2 exposures, somebody came with a watering can and watered the whole aisle. So very long time between the 2 exposures. But since there was nobody in the palace at the time, you can't see the difference. Here is another one here. Again, you can see on the one side the traces of the watering can here. And so these are the oldest stereoscopic pairs we found. There should be older ones, but so far they have not been traced. Very quickly, people decided that they also wanted movement. 3D was not enough. They wanted movement. They knew some sort of movement with magic lanterns. So here is an example of a magic lantern of a sailor smoking a pipe. And you can see here the 2 movements on this slide. And this is what it looks like when it's animated. So it's very crude, but they wanted motion. They wanted color, they wanted 3D, they wanted motion. That was in the 1850s, a long time before the Lumière brothers. And so along came this man, Antoine Claudet, who was a French photographer, and he decided that, okay, maybe we could create movements similar to what they had in Magic Lantern slides. So he took 2 photos of himself holding a cigar and pretending he was smoking. So this is Antoine Claudet himself. It's a very rare daguerreotype, obviously. And this was in 1852. So stereoscopy was introduced in 1851. 1 year later, they were already trying to introduce 3D movement. And this is Claudet. So this is what happens when you look at the photo in the stereoscope. So you see that something's wrong with the hand, but it was supposed to be looked at with one eye and then the other. So you had to blink actually to look at the thing. And this is what it looks like. So this is an attempt at movement in 3D. So this is Claudet smoking the cigar, the photographer himself smoking the cigar. So that was the first attempt at 3D in 1852. Jules Dubosc, again, went a bit further. He designed this instrument here on the left, which is called the bioscope. Unfortunately, no trace of the instruments, of the original instrument has ever been found. But we've got this ad from 1852, so we know, and we also know from articles in the press, that it was actually made and produced and sold in 1852. And the idea came from Wheatstone, who wrote to Joseph Plateau, who was the inventor of the phenakistoscope. You know, this disc with painted drawings, and when you looked at the drawings in the mirror, actually the drawings moved and you had a sort of animation. So Wheatstone wrote to Plateau, Plateau wrote to Dubosc. Dubosc said, okay, that could be done. And this is what he designed, something like this. This is a reconstruction of the instrument. And as you can see, it uses mirrors, one pointing downwards and one pointing upwards, because there were 2 pictures, one above the other in the disc. So this is a drawing used for the phenakistoscopes. It shows people dancing. And this is the only surviving disc of the bioscope. As you can see, 2 pictures, one above the other, one from the right eye, one from the left eye on the disc. And that's the only surviving thing we have. It's salt paper. So, and again, this is 1852. And nobody knows it, or very few people do, but the first movie ever was a 3D movie and was made with this. So it will never win an award at NIFFF or at the Oscar ceremony, but here it is, the first movie ever, and in 3D. So it's a steam engine, nothing, the plot is very thin, but there you go. It is moving and it is in 3D. So this is the first movie ever, 1852, more than 40 years before the Lumière brothers. So it's only a loop, a few seconds loop, but still a movie. Photographic images moving. So stereoscopy, as I said, they wanted it all. They wanted movement and they wanted 3D. Unfortunately, this was difficult to produce because they had to use stop motion. They couldn't actually photograph something in motion, but it was there. They didn't have the technology, but they already had the idea, which is something extraordinary already. So stereoscopy became a craze. That was the virtual reality of the time. It was the television of the time as well. It enabled people to travel, to discover other places. And soon there was a stereoscope in every parlor of the middle classes in France and in Britain, and then after a while all over Europe as well. So you can see people here having a stereoscope party, looking at stereos. They are sitting around the table and they are looking at stereos and commenting on them. So you could have views of topographical views of faraway places or comical views, lots of things. And this is what people did on a rainy Sunday afternoon or in the evening. it became a real craze, and this is one of the very few pictures we have of a stereoscopic factory. How they started making hundreds of photos, and again, stereoscopic views were the first mass-produced cards and photos ever. Before the carte de visite, before any other kind of photographs, stereos were the first mass-produced photographs. So photographers started taking still lifes because it was easier, of course. They didn't move, things didn't move. So lots of pictures of larders. People nowadays on Instagram take pictures of their fridge. Well, it was about the same, but the composition is a bit better usually than what you see on Instagram. So lots of pictures of still lifes, so with fruit, with busts. This one is interesting because, of course, you can see the studio of the photographer in the reflection here, in the reflection on the bottle. And then they started taking portraits. And again, they wanted everything. They wanted color too, but color didn't exist until the 1900s with the Lumiere brothers. So they hand tinted the photos. This is a daguerreotype, a photograph on metal, coated, a copper plate coated with silver and painted with dry colors. So you had to blow colors on the metal, and you have to do something like this to make them slightly wet, and then they would stick to the metal. And you had to do it twice, and you had to make sure that the stereoscopic effect was not damaged, spoiled. So these were very expensive photographs, but and they were kept. That's why they reached us in perfect condition. They were kept in special leather cases or in boxes, and they are hundreds of them. Dr. May has the largest collection of stereoscopic daguerreotypes in the world. We have over 360 stereo daguerreotypes, mostly portraits, but also events and other things. So here is another one, this one by T.R. Williams. It's a portrait and also a sort of a genre scene. The man is reading a letter or pretending to read a letter just for the composition. So photos of children, again, exposures were quite long, but the photographers managed to make their models look natural in a way. And then photography developed on glass as well. With the arrival of the collodion process, you could have negatives, and then you could produce more pictures, more copies of the pictures. So this is a glass slide of Paris by Ferrier and Soulier. Ferrier was one of the earliest topographical stereo photographer. Here is another view of Paris here, the Rue de Rivoli. So the sharpness of the collodion negative is as good as the sharpness of the daguerreotype, and so you have lots of detail, and you can actually step into the picture. And this was the virtual reality of the Victorian. They could visit places without leaving home, without leaving their firesides. They could go to Egypt. This is in 1857, Francis Frith. So you could, so far, people had to rely on woodcuts, engravings to visit places. And of course, woodcuts and engravings were drawn by artists, and sometimes the artist introduced some elements drawn from his own imagination. But with photographs, you could actually be there, see the Sphinx and the pyramids as they really were. This is the temple of Abu Simbel, again in Egypt, as if you were there. And that's what people loved about stereoscopy. They could travel, discover the world. This is India. Very few people had been to India, except the army, of course, maybe, and a few traders. And they could discover another way of life without leaving their fireplace. So that was very important for the stereoscope. That was really virtual reality for them. This is China. Again, very few people had been to China. A market in China, again, very different from what you would expect in France or in Britain or in Switzerland, of course, at the time, in the 1850s. This is 1859. This is by a Swiss photographer, by the way, Rossier. Philippe is a specialist of Rossier, so he will tell you more about him. So, for example, this is a very exotic view for Europeans. I mean, you didn't meet people dressed like that in European cities, obviously. They would have been arrested immediately. And this is a Japanese soldier, again, another slide by Rossier, published by Negretti and Zambra in 1859. Now, some other photographers decided that the medium could be used to tell stories, and this is one of the very first stories ever told for the stereoscope. It's a pantomime. It's called Guy Fawkes, or actually it's Guy Fawkes, the story of Guy Fawkes, the guy who tried to blow up the parliament but failed. So this is Guy Fawkes and one of his associates, Catesby, but they fell out. So here they are together. And this is Guy Fawkes on his own, showing the powder he's going to use to blow up the parliament. And this is Catesby sitting on the powder with a pipe. Not a very safe things to do, but anyway. And here they are falling out, fighting, and eventually Catesby betrayed Guy Fawkes, who was arrested, and he was drawn and quartered and hanged and burned. So he had... He got the treatment reserved to traitors, of course. So this is one of the very first stories, 1855, for the stereoscope. And then somebody in 1858 tried to make it a bit more, presentable. So the photographer was Sylvester, and he did this story called The Hero's Wife. And as you can see, the titles are both in French and in English. In six slides, he showed a whole story. The departure, the soldier departure, leaving for war, saying goodbye to his wife and his child, and the mother and the child praying for his well-being, and the wife dreaming that he's fighting in faraway lands, and the child still sleeping, and she's dreaming that he's been a hero and he's been awarding a medal by the Queen. And then she wakes up, realizes it's just a dream. But fortunately for her, the husband returns. So that's one of the very first stories. So people realized that with a stereoscope, you could actually start telling stories. And that's what they did. So this is the very first one, The Hero's Wife, 1858. They also tried to do something with the supernatural, and they got their inspiration from David Brewster. David Brewster wrote a book in 1856, and he gave some applications of the stereoscope, and this one is application of the stereoscope to purpose of amusement, and he explains how you can actually make a ghost for the stereoscope. And people read the book, photographers read the book, and they say, okay, well, we can do that. And they soon started, and by 1857, December 1857, they started producing slides, The Ghost in the Stereoscope, kindly suggested by Sir David Brewster. So this is one of the very first ones. This is Hamlet and the ghost of his father. So the ghost is just an actor in a suit of armor, nothing very ghost-like about him. But they started. This is another view of Hamlet, this time with Gertrude, his mother, and the ghost of his father. Now this one is so well done that the ghost is hardly visible. The ghost is here. You can barely see it. Well, it was trial and error, so the idea was that the actors who were supposed to see the ghost would sit or stand still for the whole exposure, and the ghost would actually stand for half the exposure. So if the exposure was 15 seconds, for 7 seconds and a half, the ghost would stay and then leave very quickly, and the other actors would keep their positions, and that would be a ghost. So it was, sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't work, but they tried. So here is a very first example of a ghost in the stereoscope from December 1857. As you can see, the ghost is quite solid. So, but they got better, and this one is already see-through. So yes, they got really better. And this was the most popular slide at the time. It was so popular, there was so much demand that the London Stereoscopic Company, who produced that slide, had to apologize in the press. We are sorry, but on account of the bad weather, we've been unable to print as many photos as we wanted. So there was too much demand, and they couldn't produce fast enough. So they started making lots and lots of negatives, because in those days they were contact printing. So you needed a negative and a piece of paper. If you had 10 negatives, you could print 10 views. So they did that, and they multiplied all the slides, and they were all bearing the same title, The Ghost in the Stereoscope. And you can see people trying to escape through the fireplace here. So they became more and more elaborate, and these were very popular. So they took us into the fantastic and the supernatural. And the Victorians knew how it was done because they published the thing in the press. So people knew, and it's very surprising because years later, 20 years later, when spirit photographs began to appear, people found them very, very real, and they were not. I mean, you can look at them and you see they are fake, but these look quite convincing actually. But by the time people had forgotten how they were made. So a few examples just to show how many there were. There were dozens and dozens of those, and they were getting better and better at ghosts. So this one I love particularly. So this one is really getting very, very elaborate and nicely colored, nicely tinted. All these cars are tinted, of course, hand tinted. And so most of the time the ghost was there to warn or to prevent something. So here you've got a murderer and the ghost is frightening him away. Don't touch that woman, sleeping woman. Here you can see the ghost warning somebody that they are going to be poisoned. So he's drinking poison, and the person is frightened, of course. And sometimes they would appear to sick people to tell them, well, sorry mate, but you're not going to make it. So here they are. Yeah, look, he's pointing upwards. Yeah, your time has come. So they love that kind of thing, the Victorians, of course. And you must remember that, well, the English were very fond of ghosts, and that was the time of the Christmas Carol, Dickens, and they actually did Christmas Carol for the stereoscope, the ghost of Scrooge and Marley. Here is another one, a French one. So there are hundreds of those, so they were very popular for a long time. This one is by Goodman, the ghost appearing to the miser. So it's a bit like Scrooge and Marley, actually. Don't spend too much time saving money. You will die soon anyway, and you won't take it with you. This one is the the student and the ghost of Milton. So again, this is a later one. And this is a very interesting one. This is towards the end of the stereoscopic craze. Mr. and Mrs. Ghost having their cards to visit taken before they disappeared. So they are sitting for the photographer here in the photographer's studio. So ghost, very popular for the stereoscope. And sometimes, of course, people mocked that thing. So this is called the real ghost. And as you can see, it's just a child holding a pumpkin and a sheet on a piece of wood. And the guy is frightened, but it's not a real ghost. So this was actually just to mock that fashion for ghost stereos. They also tried with angels. So this is an actual stereo. So again, quite well done. You wonder how they actually managed to do that. So this is the soul of Marguerite being carried away to heaven with angels. It was a very popular card as well. Here is another version of the same scene. The Ascension of Marguerite, carried away by angels. So nicely done, nice way to nice 3D effect, and a nice way of cheating the senses actually. The guardian angels. So these were very popular as well. The angels slightly see through and guiding the path of the little child. Or here, the guardian angels next to the cradle of the two sleeping infants. So these the Victorians loved, of course, because they were about religion and about the afterlife, and they were very popular cards. This is the Whisper of Angels, very nicely made. Again, remember this is collodion exposures of 15-20 seconds maybe. And they managed to hold. Everybody managed to hold still, and the angels disappeared at the right time, so that they are see-through. And there was always a caption on the back. So, a superstition of great beauty prevails in Ireland that when a child smiles in its sleep, it is talking to angels. So, again, something the Victorians would have loved. This is a fairy. This is a fairy by James Eliot. Not very often do you see things coming out of the screen in Victorian stereos, but this one does. It's very unusual. Usually everything was kept behind what we call the window, but this one is an exception. They also tried witches, the flying witch. So this is The Little Witch by Frederick Jones. And it works very well too. I mean, you wonder how they did it. I mean, we can imagine, of course, but at the time it must have looked very surprising for the audiences. Here is another one, again, of the witch, Little Witch. And this is all in the 1850s. Well, the three witches of Macbeth, right? Nothing striking there, but still a nice stereo effect. They tried special effects. So this one is called A Windy Day. So of course they must have used wires and strings, but still it looks very nice. It looks like a snapshot. And again, the exposure must have been 15 to 20 seconds in a studio. So you can see the flower pot. I like the flower pot here, and of course the hat there. So this is called A Windy Day. So they tried special effects as well very early. This one by a French photographer, Lefort, rain and thunder. People praying because they are afraid of the thunder. And again, imagine the time it must have taken them to set up this. I mean, these are strings, right, as you can see, but it looks very, very efficient in the stereoscope. It looks very 3D. And so that's how they did it in the stereoscope. Another example here of rain. So they, of course, once they set up, they tried to take as many photos as they could, of course, because they didn't want to do it again. So they tried rain and thunder, and again here with the wind and rain, as you can see, the crinoline. And of course the idea was always to show women's legs, because in those days very few people could actually see legs because of the fashion, and it was legs were the most erotic part of a woman's body. So they tried as often as they could to show as many legs as they could. And here, of course, with wind, it's a very good excuse. And they tried snow as well. So snow, this is again just ropes with tiny pieces of cotton wool. But again, the time it must have taken them to do that. And you can see also inside and outside. So what's happening inside. And so again, several scenes using the same set. People in the snow. And this one, the fairy playing, and the little boys playing in the snow while everybody's snug outside. And you can see here how deep you can get into the scene, really. So this was a proper studio, and this photographer, Henri Lefort, could actually have as many as 30 or 40 different people in one picture, which is quite amazing at the time. So the cinema was not far away, really. The notion of split screen, they also knew that, the Victorians, and this is another scene by Lefort. You can see the two ways of life, the girl working and the other one just looking at herself in the mirror. Mirror, mirror on the wall, tell me who is the fairest. So the two ways of life, and of course the angel on one side and the devil on the other, of course. So always something moral, a moral tone to the stories. Here is another one here, people having fun, people working. Again, the same idea, but the split screens, very, very early as well. This is another one, St. Giles and St. James. So poor children on the right, rich children on the left, right? Children playing with just paper toys and things, and expensive horses and dolls and little dogs. So. And again, the wearer and the maker on the right, the seamstress working in her attic, and on the left, the rich lady playing the harp, not doing anything during the day, just wearing fine clothes and doing not much. This is the Victorians' idea of the clash of the Titans. Not very convincing, as you can see. All the gods are women, even Zeus here. She's a woman with a beard, but she's a woman, because it would have been indecent probably to have a man sitting with ladies so scantily dressed. So they used a woman as Zeus. So that was not really a very satisfactory way of representing the clash of the Titans. So when they couldn't do it with the models, they decided to do it with clay figures, and they use clay a lot. I mean, just like King Kong, the first King Kong, was just a tiny model. Well, they did the same here and this is a bit more elaborate. This is Les Forges de Vulcain, Vulcan's Smithy, sorry. And you can see Vulcan here and his wife, of course, Venus, and the guys working here. And this is what they use, the Cyclops here working. So they use clay molds. Whenever they couldn't reproduce something with real people, they used clay models. So this is the birth of Priapus. And this is quite amazing. I mean, look at the scene, and especially look at the wet nurse. She's actually a milk jug with 2 taps. I mean, honestly, this is really quite amazing. And she has a head and the proper headdress of the wet nurse from Normandy. But their imagination was boundless. This is a very interesting one. Pygmalion, well, you know the legend. Pygmalion fell in love with the statue because it was so beautiful, and he asked, and Venus, the goddess of love, made her alive. And if you can see here, the photographer, well, the modeler, represented movement. So the statue is becoming alive, and everything else is frozen, even the camera here. And the sculptor, the model, but the statue is coming to life, and you can see here the sort of ghost of the statue. How they did that, again, because of double exposure, or just they exposed this part of the figure for half the duration of the exposure. But it's very, very cleverly done, and he did it again, this man, with Orpheus in the underworld. You can see Eurydice disappearing from under his eyes, and again she's a ghost figure. So they tried to create animation of sorts in their stereos, and it looks very convincing. When they couldn't use models, they use clay. So this is the dream of an aeronaut, and the guy is Nadar. Actually, Nadar was a cartoonist, a photographer, and a balloonist, and he was trying to find a way to fly. And so he's dreaming here of a way he can fly over Paris. And again, since you cannot use real actors or models to do that, you have to use clay. This one is a shorter version. It's called A Dream, and this was kindly. The picture was kindly lent to me by Thomas Ash, who is here. So thank you, Thomas. And for a while, Thomas thought it was one of the missing Diableries. Unfortunately, it wasn't, but still a very, very interesting picture. And with this skeleton appearing, a ghost of a skeleton, carrying an umbrella, which is odd. But anyway. And then they used the same technique for theatricals. I mean, it was impossible in those days to photograph in a theater because it was too dim. And so they sent the modeler to the theater, and he would draw the sets and the costumes, and then in his studio he would model everything. And so this is a fairy play, a sort of pantomime fairy play, La Biche au Bois, the doe in the woods. And it uses lots of monsters and transformations, and you can see here the scene front-lit. And to make it more immersive and more interested, they created what is known as French tissues. They used very thin paper, and they painted the paper on the back. And when you held the card to the light, you would see this. You would see colors coming through. So they use that a lot, especially for theatricals. So theatricals, there are about 50 different plays and operas represented in sets of 6 or 12 scenes. So this one is La Biche au Bois, 12 scenes by Habert. So here is, for example, a very famous scene with the skeletons and a waterfall. It's described by Théophile Gautier in one of his essays in 1865. And this is the colored version. And this is another scene from the same play, La Biche au Bois again, fifth act. So these plays would last for 3 to 5 or 7 hours sometimes, because there were so many extras and so many changes of sets and costumes that they would last forever. So, and here is another one, the fairy tale Podan, donkey skin, again with the same technique. So these are just color, and they would prick all the highlights. So all the jewels here are pin pricked. They use a pin and they prick a hole, and they use razors as well for the highlights. So what you see here sometimes, these are razor cuts on the swords of the soldiers, for example, which makes the cards very fragile. So it's very difficult to find them in good condition. But they are amazing when you look at them. So this is another scene from Podan, Les Petites Mines, Small Mines, and another one. So lots and lots of extras, and again lots and lots and lots of legs. So it doesn't strike us, but at the time, the more the legs, the more successful the play. It's very easy actually. So again, this is the aquarium, so it's supposed to take place underwater, and lots of, and all these figures are clay models, sometimes wearing real dresses, sometimes wearing just clay dresses, of course. And this leads us to the Diableries. So they tried Diableries with real actors, but as you can see, again, the angel and the devil, not very convincing, not very frightening, but they tried. They tried everything. So here it is again, in 3D. Yeah, not very convincing. This is the Temptation of Saint Anthony, so it's a mixture of different things, right? So cardboard cutouts, a crocodile. Why a crocodile? I don't know, but anyway, the devil in the background, and this half-dressed lady. And this is another version. This one is a bit softer because the lady, you can't really see much of the lady. But anyway. And they also tried, skeletons and things with songs. This is a song, Alonso the Brave. It's about a soldier who goes to war, and his fiancée promises to wait for him, but she doesn't. She marries somebody else. So on the day of the wedding, he comes back, and this is what he looks like. And of course, everybody faints because he looks horrible. He's dead, actually. So only his skeleton comes back. So they love that kind of thing. And this one is quite good, actually. It works very well, a mixture of dummies and real people. But they decided that it was not frightening enough, so they went for real skeletons. This one is called the Skeleton's Carouse. So they use real people. The scene was not really appreciated by a lot of people, because at the time there were cases of grave diggers. So they were wondering, okay, how did you get those skeletons? And they had to explain that these skeletons are formed of those who were compelled to leave their country for the country's good. So I mean, they are all criminals who were executed, and they kept the skeletons, and they used the skeletons of criminals. So anyway, so yeah, it was badly received, this card. So somebody tried to go to hell with real models, and this is Lefort again in his big studio trying to recreate life in hell with chains and things. And here is the devil, quite a very good costume actually, with his big look at the feet here, amazing feet, and the very big wings. And of course the cauldron. So again, it must have taken hours and maybe days to set this up, of course, for the camera. And of course, this was not used afterwards. So they took lots of photos of this, but again, not very frightening, not very convincing. So they decided to resort back to clay. And this is how Diableries were created. This is a typical Diablerie. This is probably the first ever. It's called L'Enfer, Hell. And it's a sort of a bas-relief still. It's not in high relief too much. And it was made by a guy named Hennetier, who was a self-taught modeler. And the first Diableries showing life in hell were very much religious. I mean, they were just representing people well, telling people what life would be like in hell if they behave badly on earth. So they were just reproducing what the church told them. So again, they use the technique with the colors, so they are nicely colored. And this is how it works. So this is a typical Diablerie. And you can see that picture in the exhibition. And this is when it's backlit. So you can see the eyes of the skeletons glowing. And this is what you see behind. So these are pieces of gel which are stuck on the tissue paper, which diffuses the light. And if you take off the tissue paper, you can see that the card is painted on the back. So that's how they did it. And it was very, very efficient, very clever, but very time consuming. And it would be impossible nowadays to do something similar. So another religious Diablerie, the Temptation of Saint Anthony, a very, very common theme for artists, painters, because you could actually show half-naked ladies, probably. And so it's very funny here, the guy looking, and the devil, actually, if you can see, the hand of the devil is in the back of the lady, so she looks like a puppet. He's actually a puppet master, and of course they use bellows, as they are not carrying swords but bellows, because they are devils, of course. And then Diableries became more satirical, the satire of the society. This one is called The Gateway to Hell, and you can see here Dante's warning, abandon hope, all you who enter here. And this is the janitor, talk to the janitor, of course the janitor is Cerberus, and you can have your shoes, your boots polished here, you can have a drink before you go in, because afterwards it would be a bit more difficult to have drink. So it becomes a bit funnier and a bit more satirical and less religious in a way. This one is a political satire. This is called Les Femmes de Satan au Bain, Satan's Women's Bathing. And this is the lighthouse of Biarritz, and this rock here is very peculiar, the shape, and it's in Biarritz again. So we know this is a reference to Biarritz, where the emperor had a house there, where he spent the summer there with his wife and his mistresses. And this is a reference to Napoleon III and his mistresses. And over the years, Satan was actually Napoleon III. So political satire. This one again, review of the Infernal Guard. We know from a police report that the publisher Lamiche actually had a photo in his studio which was captioned review of the Infernal Guard, and which actually showed Napoleon reviewing the Imperial Guard. So again, political satire. This is high skating in hell. So this is again more of a just a gentle way of showing life in hell, not so unpleasant after all, and nicely colored, and all the eyes glow, of course, here. This one is regattas in Satan Town, Satanville. Yeah, so you can see lots and lots and lots of skeletons here. So some of the skeletons were used several times, but most of the dioramas were destroyed immediately after they were photographed. This one is Satan the journalist. So people are complaining about the two faces of the two sides of journalism, even in the days. And so it's about Rocambole, the famous character by Ponson-du-Terrail. And so, of course, you've got Serpent de Mer, the sea serpents, things people say, journalists say when there's nothing else to say. Fake news. These are fake news, so nothing new. Les canards. And this one is Les Cocottes de Satan. The cocottes were women of easy virtue, and of course they were Satan's best soldiers, because they led men into temptation, and from temptation into ruin. So lost souls, and they all went to Satan. The Diableries, there are 182 Diableries, and when we published the book with Dr. May in 2013, we were missing 2. And 3 months after the book was published, we found this one, Satan's train connection, and we never knew what it looked like. We didn't know. We knew it was number 10 from one of the series. There are 7 different series, but we had never seen before, and there it was. And a couple of months ago, we found the very last one, the missing one, which is F12, La Cuve, the vat, and which shows people having fun with grapes and making wine. So the wine-making process, not a very nice card, but it was the missing card. So now we know all of the 182 Diableries that were made over the years. Strangely enough, okay. So this is another version which I found recently. Strangely enough, we also found the negatives of the Diableries, and this is one, War, Departure from Hell. And you can see here on the wing, maybe yeah, I've got a detail here. You can see that it's already cracking. So as soon as they were photographing the models, they're already disintegrating. So they were not kept, and we have never found a single model from the Diableries. So they just disappeared. They were just photographed and they disappeared. Now look at these skeletons, these armed skeletons. Very interesting, very nice. I mean, when you look at them, this is from the negative, so it's very sharp. And maybe it could remind you of this person, Ray Harryhausen, and the Argonauts. Very similar skeletons, aren't they? And look at this one. This is Steno. This is one of the Gorgons. Well, she's not very far away from this one. Well, this is a bit more elaborate, of course, but this is still Ray Harryhausen in The Clash of the Titans. So there was some inspiration from fantastic filmmakers in the Diableries, that's for sure. But strangely enough, it's not where we find the most interesting inspiration. This is Jacques Offenbach on the right, and this is the poster from his trip to the moon, after loosely adapted from Jules Verne's Around the Moon and Voyage to the Moon. And this operetta was made into stereos. And this is the original card, one of the original cards, the huge cannon. Strangely enough, I cannot show you the stereo because it's not, it's just flat. By the time this was made, 1876, people were losing interest in stereo, and stereo makers themselves were not helping because they were selling flat stereos, flat 3D. That's something new for you. So this is show you the huge cannon. So it may ring a bell. This is the arrival on the moon. So when they crash on the moon. Again, this is still Offenbach's operetta. And this is the Earthrise, again from the play. So now there were two series of stereo cards published at the time of the operetta. And fortunately, we have one of them which is in 3D, but not very good 3D. These are paper cutouts. After a while, they stopped making clay models. They were too expensive to make. So they started just paper cutouts to give some 3D effects. And it works, sort of. So this is from a negative. Unfortunately, the series is very difficult to find. And here is another one here with, again, this huge cannon. And the Earthrise. Well, this one is not stereoscopic because I could only find one half, but interesting scene with cutout figures. And of course, you see the same scene, very similar scene in Méliès's film Trip to the Moon from 1902. So there is no doubt that Méliès was influenced by the Diableries for sure, and by these cards from the Trip to the Moon in 1876. And this is a photo taken by astronauts from Apollo the 8th. As you know, we are celebrating this year the 50th anniversary of the moon landing, and so it's interesting to find that Méliès in 1902 was actually showing something very similar to what the astronauts from Apollo 8 saw for the first time in 1968, yeah. And this is I took this photo in a museum of film in Lisbon, and they have this amazing model of Méliès's moon with a shell or the capsule or whatever, the module in it. So no doubt, of course, that these filmmakers were very influenced by stereos, and that everything was there already. Big studios, special effects, trying to get the movement, ghost, supernatural, so everything was there. And all they needed was technology, film. They couldn't do it with glass plates, of course, so all they were waiting for was something flexible to make lots and lots of pictures fast. And but they tried, and everything, they were really paving the way to all these fantastic filmmakers. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup, Denis Pellerin, pour cette formidable conférence, vraiment éclairante. Bravo. Alors, est-ce qu'il y aurait des questions dans l'audience, dans le public? Vous pouvez poser en anglais, en français.
Quand est-ce qu'on mange, c'est ça?
Alors moi j'avais une question, mais malheureusement vous m'avez devancé par votre présentation. Je voulais voir les liens qu'il y avait avec Georges Méliès, parce qu'effectivement ça me rappelait énormément. Peut-être vous avez quelques mots à dire là-dessus.
Bon, j'aurais pu montrer les Diableries, mais bon, vous verrez peut-être mieux dans l'exposition. In the exhibition, you can see the links between Méliès and the Diableries more clearly. But Méliès was born in 1864, at the time when the Diableries were all over Paris and France, and they were popular. They kept being popular into the 1910s. And so he was definitely influenced by Diableries, and also by the trip to the moon. That there's no doubt about that. It's too close. I mean, the idea of the canon and everything, and we've got pictures showing exactly the same things in his films. And as I said, I mean, these early photographers, they had the ideas. They just didn't have the technology at the time. But they were thinking far ahead. I mean, trying to reproduce movement in 1852. Using stop motion and real photos, that was, I mean, honestly, that was amazing.
Moi, j'aurais aimé savoir, à part le voyage dans la Lune, est-ce qu'il y a d'autres pièces chorégraphiques, théâtre, opéra qui ont été utilisées en stéréo?
Oh, donc comme je l'ai mentionné, il y a à peu près une cinquantaine de pièces qui ont été faites, pièces d'opéra qui ont été faites en 3D. Donc les gens en fait achetaient dans des petites boîtes. Vous avez vu la boîte de Podane, c'était la boîte originale. Il y avait des séries de 6 ou de 12. Et donc en général des tissues, donc ils avaient l'effet jour et nuit en plus. Et oui, il y a pas mal d'opéras. Il y a la Favorite, les Huguenots. Il y a aussi différentes pièces. Il y a Mignon, il y a des Diableries, il y a la Biche au bois plusieurs fois, il y a deux de la Biche au bois, il y a donc Podane, il y a Cendrillon, ils ont fait Cendrillon aussi. Tout ça c'était des féeries, donc des spectacles à grand, avec beaucoup de transformations, avec beaucoup de... Donc dans la Biche au bois par exemple, il y a le royaume des poissons, le royaume des légumes, enfin bon, des trucs mais complètement dingues. Je veux dire, donc les gens déguisés, des gens déguisés en crustacés, des gens déguisés en poissons, ou en poireaux aussi d'ailleurs, il y a des gens déguisés en poireaux. Et donc tout ça, voilà, ils ont fait ça tout pour le stéréoscope également. Et ça a influencé aussi bien sûr les cinéastes. Pour le stéréoscope, ils ont fait par exemple Barbe Bleue. Bon, on sait que Méliès a fait Barbe Bleue. Méliès utilise dans Barbe Bleue, il utilise aussi des publicités. Il y a une publicité pour le champagne, merci à un moment. Dans le stéréoscope, dans les Diableries, ils font déjà la publicité. Il y a Mademoiselle Satan qui tient une bouteille de vin d'Aï. Elle fait de la publicité pour un des héros. Et on trouve comme ça des publicités pour différentes choses. Donc ils avaient déjà pensé à product placement. Ils connaissaient déjà ça aussi. Ouais. Oui.
Vous avez dit qu'on n'avait pas retrouvé les modèles.
Hélas, non.
Mais est-ce qu'on a des informations sur les studios ou sur les décors? On a trouvé d'autres choses?
Alors, on sait parce qu'il y a des modèles dans la presse que, par exemple, pour les pièces de théâtre, les décors sont très, très très fidèle. Le seul problème, c'est que la stéréo, donc les cartes, ils sont toujours en format portrait. C'est pour une raison très simple, les images ne peuvent pas, entre deux points identiques, on ne peut pas avoir plus de 7 cm à cause de l'écartement des yeux, parce que sinon les yeux font ça et ça fait très mal aux yeux et à la tête. Donc on a des scènes un peu compressées, on va dire. Donc quand on voit les gravures dans la presse de l'époque, les décors sont en général plus longs, parce que la scène de théâtre, voilà, elle est longue. Mais pour la stéréo, il fallait tout compresser. Mais on sait que les costumes sont exacts, parce qu'on a des photos, on sait que les décors sont exacts, parce qu'on a des gravures, des dessins, on a donc les dessins originaux. Des fois, on a même des maquettes des décors de l'époque, donc on sait qu'ils ont vraiment... au 19e siècle, il faut se rappeler que la salle était allumée, parce qu'il y avait des chandeliers, on n'allait pas éteindre les bougies une à une. Donc la salle était souvent plus éclairée que la scène. Donc les gens allaient avec... J'ai retrouvé le contrat d'un des sculpteurs, et son contrat, il est stipulé, il recevra une certaine somme d'argent tous les mois pour aller au théâtre, dessiner pendant la représentation. Donc il dessinait, il prenait des notes, il dessinait les costumes, les décors, et ensuite il reconstituait tout dans son studio. Donc c'était un travail quand même phénoménal. Et c'est pour ça qu'après, bon voilà, à la fin, ils allaient dans le papier découpé, parce que ça allait plus vite, c'est sûr, ça coûtait moins cher. Mais au départ, quand on voit les premières scène de théâtre, où on a tous les bijoux, les femmes qui portaient, si la femme porte un collier de perles, toutes les perles ont été percées d'un trou d'épingle, de façon à ce que quand on la regarde comme ça par transparence, tout d'un coup on voit la lumière, ça fait briller les perles. C'était un travail fabuleux. Et qui ferait ça de nos jours, quoi? Qui ferait ça de nos jours?
Alors merci beaucoup pour cette fascinante présentation. Pour ceux qui ont plus de questions ou qui sont intéressés, on va se rendre à l'exposition Diableries à 15h30, 15h40 pour avoir une petite visite guidée de l'expo. C'est peut-être l'occasion d'en savoir plus. Et puis sinon, nous, on se retrouve ici à 14h pour la conférence de Greg Broadmoor de Weta Workshop. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, everybody.